Introduction. On the 18th of August this year, a post by self-titled blogger The Amateur Exegete responded to comments I made in the podcast Religious Learning Program earlier on the 25th of July 2021. In his post, the Amateur Exegete expressed his interest in and appreciation for my comments, but also his surprise at the fact that I do not believe either Jesus or the New Testament writers believed in Satan and demons as supernatural evil beings. I realize you may find that a surprising and perhaps even indefensible conclusion, so I hope my arguments in favor of it will at least be of interest to you. Obviously, my personal theological stake in this matter results in a significant bias, which is why I will not be relying on my own personal interpretation of the relevant texts, but on a wide range of mainstream scholarship, mainly consisting of authors who hold the opposite view to mine. Citing the Second Temple period socio-cultural context of the New Testament, as well as a range of New Testament passages, the Amateur Exegete concluded, quote, "These and other references to Satan found in Paul sound, at least to this Amateur Exegete, like references to a personal being." End quote. With his gracious permission, throughout this video I'll refer to the Amateur Exegete with his real name, Ben. This is the first of several videos in which I respond to Ben's article, explaining my position in detail, and demonstrating why I believe it is substantiated from the lexicographical and socio-cultural evidence of the Second Temple period. Note that Ben says of himself, quote, "I am by no means a scholar and exegete," end quote. This is quite a modest statement, given that Ben also studied for 3 years at the admittedly conservative Pensacola Christian College. I've never been enrolled at a theological college or seminary, and I have no formal qualifications in any relevant field, so from that perspective, I'm even more of an amateur than he is. However, on this particular topic, I do have the advantage of having had some of my personal research published in a peer-reviewed and refereed scholarly journal, Svensk Exegetisk Årsbok, so I can at least say I'm informed on the subject and have written on it at an academic level. This video addresses these topics. 1. Amateur Exegete's case. 2. Second Temple period lexicographical evidence. Use the timestamps in the video description to navigate the content. Amateur Exegete's case. Firstly, Ben rightly makes the point that we must interpret New Testament writers such as Paul and the evangelists, the writers of the New Testament Gospels, in the context of Second Temple period Judaism, the complex array of Jewish theological beliefs which existed between around 510 BCE and 70 CE. I completely agree with this. Looking at the theological environment in which Paul and the evangelists lived provides us with a useful interpretive lens for understanding what they meant by what they wrote, and establishes some basic boundaries within which we can expect their beliefs to fall. However, this does not mean we can point arbitrarily to individual Jews or even Jewish groups during this period and say they believed X, so Paul and the evangelists must have believed X as well. We need to identify which individuals and groups they were geographically, chronologically, and theologically proximate to, and use some kind of methodology to identify significant similarities to and differences from their views and the views of those to whom they were proximate. Ben writes, quote, "Both Paul and, in many ways, the evangelists were products of the Second Temple period. Thus, interpreting these authors requires some appreciation for the historical and, relatedly, literary contexts." End quote. This is what Ben then proceeds to do. Citing Professor Emma Wasserman's statement, quote, "Apocalyptic prophecies lie at the heart of Christian origins," end quote, Ben goes on to say, quote, "Apocalypticism generally entails dualism, and that on various levels," end quote. This is a good strategy. If we can successfully identify first-century Christianity as fundamentally apocalyptic, then we can expect it to exhibit typical features of Second Temple period apocalypticism, one of which was dualism, the concept of viewing the world in a polarized way, such as a belief in a spirit world and belief in a material world, or belief in a present age of human evil and a future age of divine goodness. We can then check the New Testament literature for evidence of dualism. Again, Ben has already done this research. He cites various passages from Paul's letters and concludes that they exhibit a temporal dualism, which he says is, quote, characteristic of apocalyptic literature generally, end quote. So for Ben, Paul held an apocalyptic view featuring a temporal dualism consisting of what Ben calls, quote, a present age characterized as evil and coming to an end, and a future age that inaugurates an era of peace under the reign of the God of Israel, end quote. Ben cites the New Testament books of Galatians and 1 Corinthians in support of this conclusion. These are two books which mainstream scholarship virtually unanimously agrees are authentic letters by Paul, so Ben is on solid ground here. And I agree with him. I agree Paul held an apocalyptic worldview in which temporal dualism held a significant place. Ben then turns to Jesus, writing, quote, that Jesus of Nazareth held to an apocalyptic worldview is implied both by the Apostle Paul's own commitment to it, as well as by the first words Jesus speaks in our earliest gospel, end quote. Again, I agree with this. Ben then goes beyond this to characterize the specific kind of apocalypticism he believes Jesus and Paul held. He observes that at this time there were, quote, two tracks of apocalyptic eschatology, cosmic and forensic, end quote. A cosmic or cosmological apocalyptic attributes the origin of evil and sin to supernatural evil forces and describes life's central conflict as a battle of opposing supernatural forces, such as Satan and demons on one side and God and his faithful angels on the other. In contrast, a forensic apocalyptic attributes the origin of evil and sin to human beings and describes life's central conflict as a battle of opposing good and evil human groups, referred to as ethical dualism, and or a battle within the human psyche, referred to as psychological dualism. Ben provides a couple of reasons why he believes Jesus and the New Testament writers held to a cosmological apocalyptic with cosmic dualism. He first cites, quote, the demonic spirits that plague Mark's conceptual world, end quote. Ben reasons that if Mark describes the world of Jesus as containing demons with which Jesus must battle, then Jesus and the gospel writers must have believed supernatural evil was the origin of evil and sin, and they must also have believed in an ongoing cosmic battle between supernatural evil and good powers. In further support of this, Ben points out that Jesus is depicted in the earliest Gospels as an exorcist, and that if this depiction is broadly correct, quote, then surely Paul would remain in this general vein, end quote. In other words, we would expect Paul would also be at least depicted as an exorcist. He then points out that the author of the New Testament book Acts of the Apostles, quote, thought of Paul as a miracle worker generally and an exorcist particularly, end quote. Now we move on to the next part of Ben's argument, in which he cites Paul's references to Satan. Ben writes, quote, though Paul himself nowhere describes performing an exorcism, he does talk about Satan, end quote. He cites New Testament books 1 Thessalonians and 2 Corinthians as examples and alludes to, quote, other references to Satan found in Paul, end quote. Again, he is citing books which are virtually universally attributed to Paul, so these works are reliable sources of Paul's views. In conclusion, Ben writes, quote, these and other references to Satan found in Paul sound, at least to this amateur exegete, like references to a personal being, end quote. So that's Ben's case. I disagree with him on these points. 1. I disagree that Jesus and Paul held a cosmological apocalyptic. I believe they held a forensic apocalyptic. 2. I disagree that Paul and Jesus believed in supernatural evil demons and spirits. 3. I disagree that uses of the word Satan in the New Testament should be understood as references to a supernatural personal evil being. Now I must begin to present my own case. Let's start by reviewing the Second Temple period in more detail. Second Temple period satanic vocabulary. One of the lines of evidence Ben cited in favor of understanding Jesus and the New Testament writers as believers in a personal supernatural evil, Satan, and demons was Paul's use of the word Satan. This word has a curious lexical history. Although it has long been established as a word in the English language, it was actually borrowed from a Greek word which sounds almost identical, which in turn was borrowed from a much earlier biblical Hebrew word with almost the same pronunciation. Of course, in contemporary English, the word is typically understood as the personal name of a supernatural evil being, frequently identified in mainstream Christianity as a fallen angel. However, as I am certain Ben will agree, we cannot rely on contemporary English meanings of English words in order to determine our understanding of Second Temple period Greek and Hebrew words. So we'll need to return to the Second Temple period to do the lexicographical research needed in order to see how this word was understood before, during, and shortly after the New Testament writers were composing their works. This is known as diachronic and synchronic analysis. Since we're dealing with the figure of Satan as used by the Gospel writers as well as by Paul, let's extend our examination to 4 key terms found in the Gospels: Satan, the devil, the tempter, and the evil one. As surprising as it may seem, we're going to see that the lexicographical evidence contradicts the assumption that these terms normally referred to a specific supernatural evil being in the 1st century. In Second Temple period literature, the term Satan, whether in Hebrew or Greek, is predominantly used as a common noun rather than as a personal name. The term devil in Greek is rarely, if ever, used to refer to a supernatural being, and the terms the tempter and the evil one have no pre-Christian witness with such a meaning. Here is a summary of the diachronic and synchronic analysis of this terminology in Second Temple pre-Christian texts. Note that this summary compresses about 15 pages of lexicographical analysis, which are available in one of my research papers. See the video description for a link. The term Satan is used in the book Sirach of the Evil Inclination, the natural impulse within humans which causes them to sin. This is the complete opposite of an external supernatural evil being. The word is also used in 1st Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and Qumran texts 1QH, 1QSB, 4Q504, and also in the later document Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. However, in all of these texts, it is used as a common noun. It is not used as a name or as a proper noun referring to one specific being. In these places, it is used in a very general sense to mean an adversary, or the adversary, or any adversary, or even adversaries, generally in plural. In these cases, it refers sometimes to a human and sometimes to an obedient angel of God who is carrying out his commandments. In 1st Enoch, it is used of an obedient angelic servant of God, and in Qumran text 11Q5, the prayer for deliverance, it refers to the evil inclination, the natural impulse within humans which causes them to sin. The term the devil is used in the Old Greek or Septuagint in 1st Chronicles, speaking of an enemy nation which attacked Israel, the book of Esther, where it is used of an evil man called Haman, Psalm 108, where it is used of a human slanderer, the book of Job, where it is used of Job's unidentified adversary, and the book of Zechariah, where it is used of an unidentified accuser of a human high priest. It is also found in the book Wisdom of Solomon, where it most likely refers to Cain, the second son of Adam and Eve, who killed his brother Abel, and it is found in the book of 1st Maccabees, a historical book, where it is used to refer to human adversaries. Significantly, in all these texts, it is always found in the form the devil, even though this term clearly does not have the same referent in each passage. This is evidence that the term the devil was not understood at this time of a unique referent, certainly not an established term for a specific supernatural being, whether evil or otherwise. It is also found in the book Testaments of the 12 Patriarchs and possibly in the book Ascension of Moses, but there is no evidence that these texts predate the New Testament Gospels. The term the evil one has no Second Temple pre-Christian witness, which has prompted many scholars to argue that this Greek phrase, as it is used in the New Testament Gospels, should not even be read as the evil one, but evil in general. Several times in the much later medieval Talmudic literature, the writings of the Jewish rabbis and scholars, the term evil one is used in the vocative of the evil inclination, the natural impulse within humans which causes them to sin. The term the tempter in Greek has no Second Temple pre-Christian witness. It is also absent from the Apostolic Fathers, the early Christian writings of the late 1st century and early 2nd century. So we're left with a surprising lack of evidence for a specific supernatural evil being in Second Temple period Judaism who was referred to as Satan, or the devil, or the tempter, or the evil one. New Testament scholar Guy Williams notes that, quote, much literature from the period makes no specific mention of Satan, end quote, adding that, quote, even when Satan is mentioned, it is commonly as a type of angel, occurring frequently in the plural, the Satans, end quote. Non-Christian Second Temple period literature does contain references to specifically named supernatural adversaries who typically oppose humans and inflict harm on them. Sometimes these are described as angels, sometimes more generally as spirits. However, we don't find them named Satan. Professor of Old Testament exegetics Antti Lato observes, quote, Satan was not the self-evident name of the leader of demons in early Jewish writings, end quote. He cites the angelic adversary in 1st Enoch, who is called either Shemihaza or Asahel, and the angelic adversary in Jubilees and some Qumran texts, who is called Mastema, and he also cites Beliar, an angelic adversary found in the Qumran texts, as well as in the pseudepigraphal Testament of the 12 Patriarchs. This again demonstrates how diverse Second Temple period cosmological views were, reinforcing the fact that we can't simply assume there was a single supernatural evil being called Satan that everyone knew about. Not only that, but when we come to the New Testament, we find no reference to Shemihaza, or Mastema, or Asahel, and we find only one reference to Beliar. This is most unusual if the New Testament writers shared the same cosmological dualism as other Second Temple period Jews. Professor of Near Eastern Studies Theodore J. Lewis notes that, quote, Belial, or Beliar, is the most frequently used title for the leader of the forces of darkness in the Qumran material, end quote. However, he notes that the New Testament exhibits a completely different pattern, writing, quote, in light of the extensive use of Belial above, it is surprising to find only one occurrence of Belial in the New Testament, end quote, which he locates in the New Testament book 2 Corinthians 6, verse 15. Although he says that the context of its use here, quote, reminds us of the dualistic use of Belial and the forces of darkness, fighting God and the forces of light, mentioned above in both the pseudepigraphic and Qumran material, end quote, the fact that the word is used only once in the entire New Testament, and in a context which does not at all rely on the referent being a personal being, is significant. In fact, the highly understated, almost offhand manner in which the term is used in the New Testament does not suggest Paul was using it to emphasize the importance of a supernatural evil personal being. Otto Bircher, professor of New Testament studies, although taking for granted that Paul is referring to a Satan figure here, nevertheless notes, quote, just as Paul does not intend to make a Christological statement, so also he places little emphasis on the role of the devil, end quote. As surprising as it may seem, therefore, Second Temple period lexicographical evidence demonstrates that when we read Satan, devil, evil one, and the tempter in the New Testament, we cannot simply assume that they all refer to a single supernatural evil being that everyone knew about. In fact, we can't even assume that they necessarily refer to a personal being at all. and we definitely can't assume that they even have a single referent. Consequently, Anti-Lato notes that, quote, we lack an established tradition whereby the name of the personal evil or the leader of demons is Satan, end quote. Likewise, Guy Williams concludes, quote, there was, then, no standard nomenclature for this figure. We find no edifice which we may call the Jewish doctrine of Satan, end quote. Note that Williams himself believes personally in a supernatural evil Satan and demons, and believes the New Testament writers did also, so this is not a source biased in favor of my own perspective. In the second video of this response, we'll examine New Testament terminology in more detail. But for now, it's worth noting just how little evidence there is for the assumption of widespread Jewish belief in a well-established supernatural evil being called Satan, whose existence the New Testament writers took for granted. In particular, the New Testament's almost complete avoidance of the names and terminology typically used to refer to such figures in Second Temple period literature suggests a very different conclusion. Second Temple period beliefs about evil. Now let's look more broadly at beliefs in supernatural evil during the Second Temple period. Though belief in supernatural evil was prevalent, it did not necessarily involve a satanic figure. Williams, cited previously, writes that, quote, most Jews in the Second Temple period did believe in some sort of supernatural evil, but not necessarily an explicit adversary of God, end quote. Rabbi Bernard J. Bamberger, a scholar of Second Temple period literature, concurred with this view, noting that the book Wisdom of Ben Sira, quote, never mentions demons, end quote. He also notes that the books of the Maccabees, Second Temple period books of the Maccabees, Judith, and the Testament of Abraham, quote, contain nothing for our purpose, end quote. Even more importantly, Bamberger notes that belief in supernatural evil was even rejected directly by some Second Temple period Jewish teachers. He cites the Apocalypse of Ezra and the Apocalypse of Baruch as examples, writing, quote, in their effort to solve the problem of evil, these writings make no use of dualistic myths concerning fallen angels, evil spirits, or devils, end quote. I'm focusing on these two texts in particular because both of them exhibit the features of forensic dualism, attributing evil and sin to the actions of human beings. As Bamberger says, the Ezra Apocalypse, quote, finds the source of evil in the sin of Adam, end quote. And the Baruch Apocalypse, quote, traces the beginning of evil to Adam's sin, end quote. These are not the only Second Temple period texts of this nature, and Bamberger is not alone in his assessment of them. In fact, many scholars acknowledge that the Second Temple period books of the Maccabees, Wisdom of Sirach, the Apocalypse of Baruch, and the Apocalypse of Ezra exclude or reject belief in supernatural evil. These scholars include Bernard Bamberger, Eric Eve, Karina Hogan, Vernon Emmel, Alexander Dilella, Larry Hellier, Paolo Sacchi, Piero Capelli, Gabriele Boccaccini, and Neil Forsyth. In particular, Eric Eve notes that in 4 Ezra, also known as Apocalypse of Ezra, dating to just after the end of the Second Temple period, quote, the fallen angels and evil spirits have entirely fallen out of sight, leaving innate human sinfulness as the central problem, end quote. This trend is also cited by Bamberger, who writes that the supernatural evil beliefs of cosmic evil, quote, were never accepted by all the Jewish teachers, end quote, adding that, quote, many important thinkers had discarded them before the rise of Christianity, end quote. This understanding persisted well into the rabbinic era. Jeffrey Burton Russell writes, quote, most of the rabbis rejected the concept of a personified being leading the forces of evil and preferred to speak of the devil only as a symbol of the tendency to evil within humans, end quote. Conclusion. As Ben rightly says in his article, quote, both Paul and, in many ways, the evangelists were products of the Second Temple period. Thus, interpreting these authors requires some appreciation for the historical and, relatedly, literary contexts, end quote. In this video, I've reviewed terms used for evil figures in Second Temple period Judaism, as well as terms in the New Testament which have traditionally been understood as referring to a single supernatural evil personal being, typically a fallen angel or demon. I've also reviewed the evidence for a Second Temple period countercurrent of beliefs about evil, which directly opposed the cosmological dualist view of a world in which evil and sin are caused by supernatural evil beings. These results are quite disruptive to typical assumptions about both Second Temple period beliefs about evil and the meaning of specific terms in the New Testament. In the next video, I'll examine these topics. 1. Second Temple period apocalypticism and dualism. 2. New Testament apocalypticism and dualism. 3. New Testament exorcism. 4. New Testament Satan and demons. If you find this video of interest, please like and share it, and leave a comment or question if you feel inclined. Thank you.